Today is the 31st of July. I'm very privileged, very honored, and extraordinarily happy to invite to our channel somebody whose work I've admired for a very long time. His name is Danny Haiphong. You know him very well. And he has a very unique voice to add to everything that we do. And I will soon be turning over the microphone to him. Before I do that, I wish to request that if you like what we do, please hit the like and subscribe button. The algorithms like that. And if you wish to become a paid member so that you can receive everything we provide in terms of the security briefs, uh, go to our Substack show, become a paid member for $5 a month, very small amount of money, and you will receive these briefings every single week inside your mailbox. With that introduction, please go ahead, Danny. The floor is yours.
Appreciate it. It's always great to be here. Well, I believe the theme here should be changing facts on the ground, and that's exactly what Iran is doing. And I know that we've received information about this and how Iran is actually using this period. It's not the MOU period anymore that has been completely squandered and set ablaze by the Trump administration, by the United States empire at this point. So Iran right now, despite the lack of a consistent U.S. air campaign and U.S. Campaign of aggression against Iran now, it's very inconsistent at this point. There are days where there are strikes, there are days when there aren't strikes against Iran. But what is consistent and what is now coming out is that Iran is seeking to not just defend itself, but to actually alter the situation on the ground so that it gets exactly what it said it wanted in the MOU and onward, which is, of course, respect for its sovereignty, as well as all of the various stipulations that goes into such a thing, from reconstruction all the way down to sanctions ending, and of course the end of any possibility of the United States and Israel too from being able to attack Iran again. And that's exactly what's happening. And this is what I've been following. I know you've been following it as well. We are seeing it every single day. Even when Iran isn't striking U.S. bases, Iran is diminishing and destroying the possibility of any force in the region from being able to interfere in its affairs. We see it every day on the Iraqi border with Iran in Erbil and with Iranian strikes on Kurdish forces there. I know we were speaking before the program on the situation now with Iraq and how the United States, and we have to talk about Saudi Arabia in this, getting involved in what really is a suicidal and really desperate campaign to pin the blame on Saudi Arabia's woes on the popular mobilization forces in Iraq, all point to what is becoming an uncontrollable trap for the Trump administration and the United States. One that, contrary to what Trump says every day, what Pete Hegseth says every day, what you hear from U.S. officials through Axios every day, this kind of misinformation and misintelligence that we're fed that Iran is weak, Iran has nothing left, and that the United States is absolutely gaining leverage through its limited campaign at this point against Iran. The opposite is true. And I think the proliferation, given Iran's plan now that we know its plan is to change facts on the ground and to use the next several weeks to get what it wants from the United States, which is an end to this war and the stipulations necessary to actually bring justice to this crime, both for Iran and for the region. These next 2 weeks are going to be critical, and we're seeing every single day, especially in the last few days, Iran making it clear what it's doing. It is ejecting the United States out of the region, and we have Wall Street Journal reporting that Kuwait is becoming a very sore spot for the United States. U.S. officials are talking with the Trump administration, defense officials, those so-called experts, the masters of war. They're all talking about maybe Kuwait is not a great place to hold U.S. forces anymore. They've already evacuated en masse because of Iranian strikes. Now they're talking about a permanent end to U.S. operations and U.S. basing there. So this is, and we already know about Jordan. We've talked about this. You've talked about this on your show. I've talked about it on my show. The absolute devastation that Iran has wreaked on U.S. bases in Jordan, especially Muwafiq Al Salti Air Base. So really, what Iran is doing is very clear publicly and in private. I think what's stunning is that the information that's coming out is that Iran. This is not some random set of strikes, retaliation, it's often called. No, now Iran is setting, it has been setting into motion for a long time now, arguably since the war began, but especially since the new round of strikes began a couple weeks ago. It's setting into motion a legitimate strategy that's well planned and well armed to slowly but now more rapidly uh, whittle down, grind down U.S. forces in a way that makes this war an irreparable disaster for the United States. And this is, I think, this is something historically unprecedented. I think we have never seen this before in history. We've seen very heroic things people and countries around the world doing over the course of years and decades. But what Iran is doing militarily to the United States is simply unprecedented, especially since 1945, and of course, in particular, 1991, when the U.S. declared it was the only game in town. Now, the United States is facing an Iran that, despite all of the attempts to turn the region into rubble, into dust, to turn it into chaos, as it has over many years and decades, Iran is standing very tall, and its strategy is being implemented to the T. And that, I think, that is what is causing so much frustration for the Trump administration, where every single meeting with U.S. officials now inside of the administration is just reeking of frustration, of absolute desperation, and I think that's where we are right now, and it's, I think it's really something to behold.
Well, Danny, everything that you said is 100% supported by the sources to which we are attached, uh, who provide us information that we believe comes directly from people who are involved in whatever is going on in the region, which is a lot, and which we believe to be true. Otherwise, we would not be doing this. And I would like to simply add a few other points to what you just said. Uh, we are not saying anything that we do not have very solid information behind these facts to support what we are saying from people who are in the room making decisions uh, involved in the theater of war. So the information coming from the Iranian leadership is that they have simply lost patience with Mr. Trump. They have tried every single time to come to the negotiating table after Trump has ran to Asim Munir, begged him to arrange a meeting, begged him to do this and do that, and Asim Munir, to his credit, a Pakistani field marshal, has always delivered. So a couple of days ago, we were reporting that the MOU is back. Well, it was back for maybe a few hours, only to be
Yeah.
destroyed by Trump one more time. So now the most recent information that supports everything that Danny said is that Iran has decided, the leadership has decided, no way we are going to believe anything that comes out of Trump's mouth. We are going to force the decision on the ground. And that is what is happening, and that is what is unprecedented. And that is exactly the disinformation that feeds the disinformation coming out of Washington, that, oh, we have destroyed Iran, oh, we have done this, and oh, we have done that, and none of which is true. This is all stuff that has happened every single time before, with Iraq, with Afghanistan, with the going back in history in Vietnam. uh, a complete set of lies, a complete set of nonsense, and facts on the ground were totally different. Another fact, which is very, very significant, not reported by any media that I'm aware of, is that there is a massive movement of arms coming out of China, going through the port of Gwadar to Iran. Western media is focused upon a very small shipment of manpads that moved a couple of days ago. But I can absolutely confidently report to you, because I've spoken to people who have witnessed this transaction, seen the transit, that Iran is very confident in what it does because it is receiving significant, lethal, very advanced weaponry from China that allows it not only to strike but to defend itself. Big uh, improvement in their ability to withstand what anything that the United States can throw at it. So Iran is now dictating facts on the ground, and it is our belief that within 2 weeks the situation is going to resolve itself. We are in the final stages. We are not moving in the finals towards the final stages. We are in the final stages. So back to you, Danny.
I, one must ask, or viewers should ask themselves as they watch this, why hasn't the United States tried to strike deeper into Iran? Why hasn't it tried to engage in a campaign that is far bigger than the one that it has been engaging in over the last several weeks, and with actually sporadic periods of absolutely nothing, no airstrikes, no HIMARS launching, ATACMs launching from places like Kuwait, nothing. So we have to ask, well, why is it looking like this now? And of course, our mutual friend on this channel, and of course, the big part of this channel, Larry Johnson, often talks about the diminishing weaponry and the diminishing stockpiles of weaponry for the United States, especially in relation to air defenses and standoff munitions and the like, making it much more difficult, of course, to sustain a longer campaign. And that, of course, is 150% true. But we also need to look at, as you said, Iran's capability to defend itself, not just to strike US bases, but to make it very difficult for a bigger campaign to be launched by the United States. For example, in the realm of its own air defenses, we saw them play out. We saw this dynamic play out later on in the initial wave of strikes, the big round one of the war that the U.S. and Israel launched beginning February 28th. We saw toward the latter end before the MOU was signed what happened to F-15 fighter jets and all of the chaos that ensued because of the downed F-15. That is likely to repeat itself in in a many-fold way if the United States tries to go deeper into Iranian airspace, precisely because it has its own air defenses, and as you said, it is being supplied by friends, China, and I'm sure Russia is also helping Iran, whether it's through directly trading advanced weaponry to Iran, or what a lot of my Chinese contacts will tell me, or just trading various parts and elements that Iran needs for its economy, which can easily be used for military purposes and can only help but strengthen the military industrial capacity of Iran, which is, of course, China's right to trade whatever it wants with Iran, especially in the economic realm, and not worry about how Iran uses those things, because that's not within China's right. Iran has the right to use its economic materials, resources, and the like it receives from other countries, however it wants. So this is I believe, a big dynamic at play here. Iran does have the ability to defend itself from bigger strikes. So even whatever the United States want, even if the U.S. wanted to launch, let's say, a week-long campaign where it tries to go deeper and deeper into Iran, intimidate, let's say, the people of Tehran. Good luck. Intimidate the people in central Iran. It wouldn't work, but it turns out it would likely end in disaster. You might see one, two, three, four times as many fighter jets, F-35s, F-15s shot out from the sky. And this is something the U.S. can't risk because the war is already very unpopular in the United States. It's already having a major economic impact. Now that the situation is regional, the conflict is more regional than it was even uh, prior to this latest round of strikes. Uh, that only means more pressure on the economy. I'm sure you saw the reports that the Saudi economy has contracted by nearly 5% in the last quarter. And that's going to get worse because Yemen, Ansarallah, Iran's very good friend, is now engaging in a counter siege with Saudi Arabia, and it's very effective. And Iran just announced as we speak that the Strait of Hormuz is not just closed, but any ships that attempt to go through that mythical Omani corridor will be struck and turned back. And that's exactly what's already happened to several ships in the last 24 hours. So the situation is very bleak for the United States. The U.S. would do very well, actually, to um, go back to some kind of negotiation process. I always say that if you just look at if I'm in the minds of the masters of war, or the warmongers, or the neocons, why wouldn't you take an opportunity to take a breather, to stop, to try, even if you're going to try to swindle Iran, it's not going to work, but even if you try to claim, maybe give it a little bit more time, maybe it's days and weeks and not just hours as you put it before with the MOU period. Maybe you give it some weeks to massage the idea of concessions. Maybe you turn back later on, in the future. But nonetheless, the U.S. doesn't even seem capable of this, of even trying to manipulate the negotiation process. And I think that's a really big sign of weakness. I know there are some in the independent media sphere, and I understand the concerns that believe that right now the situation looks like the U.S. is trying to conduct some kind of strategic global blockade of energy to corner the energy markets, to weaken the entirety of the multipolar world in a very coordinated strategic campaign of suffocation and choking the choke points, so to speak. And while certainly the United States empire, hell, the national security strategy basically said that under the Trump administration that that's what it wanted to do by refocusing its efforts on certain parts of the world and, of course, going after maybe the weak points of the multipolar world. Nonetheless, I don't believe that's what's happening at all. I believe the U.S. has actually gambled everything on just trying to destroy Iran. Believes that if it can succeed in what has already failed, then it will be in a much stronger position to get to Russia and China. And I believe none of this actually aligns with reality, and that reality isn't really the question here when it comes to how the masters of war are thinking and pursuing policy right now. It truly is that events have unfolded. We've seen now the reality situation come to fruition, and now the U.S. empire, far from a strategic entity, a strategic planning kind of system, now it is more on the back foot in terms of how it attempts to navigate and control the situation than even in usually, because usually what it's doing is not strategy, it's domination, plunder, shoot from the hip, go anywhere you can to destroy, to steal, to lie, to cheat, and to make as much money and to gain as much power and hegemony as possible to make that money. That is really where these people who make these decisions, who really drive wars, that's what they're thinking about. But now that's coming into a huge brick wall. It's running into one, and that's where we are. I think that's the biggest problem here for the United States is it should pull back. It probably should just stop for a while. It probably should just give concessions that wouldn't affect the U.S. empire that gravely, actually. But it cannot, because if it does so, then it's a huge victory for Iran. It's a huge victory for the multipolar world, and it is a concession and an admission that there is a process underway in the world that cannot be stopped or changed, and that is far too difficult a pill to swallow.
Well, Danny, let me just add a couple of more points. Amen to everything that you just said. Amen to everything that you just said. Let me just add a couple of more points. And again, all of it is supported by the reporting that we are privileged and honored to receive. Uh, a very, very strict red line was communicated to Mr. Trump by Iran via Asim Munir. and I was specifically authorized to discuss this. Otherwise, I would not be talking about it. Just recently, actually, a couple of days ago. And that red line was that you attack any of our nuclear sites, as Trump was threatening to do. I mean, he was constantly talking about, striking the nuclear sites, destroying the nuclear sites, blah blah blah, getting rid of the Iran nuclear program. But a warning came directly from Ayatollah Mujtaba Khamenei via Asim Munir to Trump, directly to Trump, that you do that, Iran is going to explode a nuclear device on its own soil to demonstrate that we have this capability, and the world is going to change, and and your empire is going to collapse thereafter. So now the reality of that is seen in what is exactly happening on the ground. U.S. has not struck any Iranian nuclear sites in the last week or so. Stayed clear, stayed the hell away from that. So, so somebody in the Trump administration is listening to the evolving facts on the ground. Maybe the military is doing that. Maybe the military is understanding that. I mean, in fact, I mean, everybody knows that General Kane spoke to Trump and said that a campaign of total destruction of Iran is not going to work. Uh, Another fact that I think we need to talk about is that all of this, as you and I know, and we have brought this to our audience, is in support of the petrodollar. The petrodollar regime that was erected 50 years ago to bring all the dollars back into the United States, so the United States could run up a $40 trillion deficit, debt, and then support all these wars. Well, if the U.S. strikes Iran infrastructure, Iran again, another report that I received from my sources was that Asim Munir told Trump, "You do that, and every single base, every single country that houses your base will be destroyed,
Yeah.
and those countries will not survive a destruction of their desalination plants, a destruction of their lifeline. Iran can survive that. Iran is a very, very diverse country, 90 million people, many mountains, many places. It can rebuild, but Gulf countries cannot rebuild. So that apparently got through to somebody in Trump's head, and that has not happened. So the facts on the ground are changing as we speak. As we speak, this is what we saw in every single place where the U.S. has blundered itself and moved like a mad elephant, trying to trample over everything but accomplish nothing, and eventually got out. So facts on the ground are consistent with our reporting. Facts on the ground support everything that we have said on our channels. And the purpose of this, obviously, to inform the world audience, growing world audience, that is now thankfully listening to independent media that you bring. And I have listened to it for a very long time and admired it and honored that you decided to lend your voice to what we are doing. And what we have begun to do is to bring these facts to our audience so that they can be informed that yes, world is changing right now, and it's a tectonic shift.
Yep.
Once the petrodollar regime is weakened, really weakened, the U.S. is not going to be the hegemon that it has been, and the global South is going to rise. Eurasia is going to rise, and we will live in a different world, and hopefully a much different and a much happier world eventually, because we are not going to be ruled by people who make profit by creating war.
Yeah, those are great points, and as you were talking and you mentioned the petrodollar, it's astounding to see Saudi Arabia put itself up as the shield of the United States at this point, when Saudi Arabia is absolutely critical to the petrodollar. So to entangle itself into now multiple elements of this regional war in a very direct way, in a way that could and already is devastating its oil production and oil trade capabilities. Well, that has to be studied for quite some time in history. And I wanted to also mention that as you were talking about desalination plants, power plants, etc., infrastructure in the Gulf, which is very vulnerable if the United States tries to attack, like facilities in Iran again, as Trump has promised, even as soon as today, saying, well, we'll take out the bridges, we'll take out the power plants. If that happens, and even if it happens in a limited way, Iran can in a very strategic and calculated way move up an escalation ladder that's contained to this part of the war, meaning that it doesn't have to take out all of the desalination plants at the same time. It can go one by one by one by one. And the United States and the Gulf countries can do nothing to stop it. So it could be a slow burn, especially if Iran calculates that the U.S. is not capable of attacking Iran in a way that could be decisive. So that means Iran has the capability to place immense pressure on these countries to stop and give in, which is what they want. And this is what you hear from Iran all the time. They speak directly to the people of these countries, to the people of Kuwait, the people of Jordan. They speak directly to them saying, we are not trying to affect and destroy your interests. No, it's the US, it's the warmongers, it's them. They are trying to destroy the region, and they're going to give every opportunity for the people of these countries to do what is necessary to preserve and actually address the real interests of the people there. So it's a very calculated campaign. It's very strategic, and it's one that considers the entirety of the geopolitical situation, not just the military front, in totality. We see Iran say, nearly every other day when it conducts operations within what it calls Operation Thunder, in response to the U.S. aggression, it says it has intelligence in Jordan, it has intelligence in Kuwait. Iran has connections to obviously people and likely people very close to the military action, because it only just so happens that now every time Iran strikes, Iran is striking something very specific, and it's striking something like, for example, fighter jet hangars that are constantly being reorganized and shuffled because they're in panic of these resources and assets being the United States is being hit. So they're constantly moving. The U.S. is right now. They're constantly moving tankers. They're constantly moving fighter jets. They're moving their drones. They're moving their missile systems. They're moving all of these things constantly. They're shuffling it around. They're trying to figure out where they can avoid being hit, but they can't avoid it even still. So this is, I think, part of this tectonic shift, which is not only has the U.S. been made blind by Iranian strikes, but Iran can see better. Iran can see far better than it could even in February 28th in that initial round, and um, I think that is very telling, and I think it could be part of a tectonic shift where some joke that what the U.S. war on Iran and the U.S.-Israeli war on Iran will do is not affect regime change on Iran, but it could affect regime change all across the region for those who have been considered U.S. and maybe even we could go so far as saying U.S.-Israeli regimes, backed regimes like those in the Gulf, like MBZ and like Mohammed bin Salman, like the monarchies in Bahrain, and Kuwait and other countries. So I think this is the trend. This is what we're seeing now absolutely explode, especially with Saudi Arabia, as I mentioned before. Not only is its economy contracting, but it has now entangled itself with just not only unwinnable wars, but wars that are completely disastrous for Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and Yemen, which the United States will not defend Saudi Arabia over because the U.S. does not want to see itself lose another several fronts in the war against Iran, including what it already knows to be the case, which is that Yemen will not back down from the U.S. It didn't in March of last year, and it won't now. So this is a big disaster for the U.S. This is only going to get worse, and this is where I think as you said, the U.S. has a long history of having to get the hell out of countries that it cannot defeat, even countries that are much weaker. But then the question is, well, the U.S. will do anything to preserve its hegemony. Well, where will it turn then? It's obviously trying to turn to Latin America and squeeze Latin America as best as it can. But in the region of West Asia, I think that there will still be desperate attempts, as our mutual friend and, of course, co-founder of this channel, Pepe Escobar, said, a last gasp desperate move. And what could that be? We don't know. It's not going to change the calculus on the ground, but it could very well um, create a catastrophic situation for the region and especially the world economy. So that is something to definitely watch out for. But at the end of the day, I think what we are seeing is that the world is being, sometimes my friend Mark Sleboda say, no, we're actually more in a bipolar world because you have a Russia, China, and Iran that are getting far stronger, and you have the United States that is desperately trying to stop itself from getting weaker and weaker. And that's why it becomes this kind of mad, rabid dog that can't stop biting. But nevertheless, I think we are actually seeing a much more stable alternative world order coming into being, which means that the rest of the world will have an opportunity to learn from Iran, to work with Iran, Russia, and China. And the United States is going to do everything it can to stop that. And that's what we're going to have to watch out for as the U.S. finds itself in a position where there's no exit ramp for the situation with Iran. And so a lot of chaos, a lot of, I believe, still conflict, even if the end game is coming for Iran, with Iran. The U.S. cannot jump off the seat of conflict if it's ruled by what some call the Epstein class, the Masters of War, capital, all of these elements. They are really seething at the mouth. They are foaming at the mouth, wondering how they can stop all of this. And that means we also need to buckle up as we also analyze the reality for what it is, which is very dire for U.S. hegemony.
Well, some additional clarification, Danny, to what you just said. I mean, that will amplify everything that you just said, which is completely accurate. We reported on this channel maybe 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago that Iran had received extraordinary capabilities through the Beidou system, which were facilitated, we reported exclusively on our channel because we had access to that information, by Pakistani technicians who were very familiar with that system and other technologies that came from China, because Pakistan and China have been very, very close in respect to literally all matters, but especially having to do with military matters. Pakistani technicians were dispatched into Iran on China's approval and Iran's request to help Iran get up to speed very, very quickly on all Chinese technologies relating to this war, particularly having to do with the Beidou system and the electronic warfare system. And we see that in action right now, especially now supported by Russia as well. So the U.S. is beginning to understand that targeting by Iran, using the intelligence that comes from Russia, from the capabilities provided by China, is so precise that it can hit a target within centimeters, literally centimeters. Uh, we discussed this on this channel, a couple of days ago. Larry, who knows very well, who knows quite a bit about these matters, discussed it at great length, and for that reason, the U.S. military is nervous about any more aggressive actions, because they understand that you attack Iran, immediately thereafter there will be a precise attack on a U.S. asset. So that if Iran destroys everything that is set up as infrastructure in the Gulf countries, which means they no longer support oil production, no longer support oil export, then what happens to the petrodollar? There is no petrodollar anymore. So the US would have essentially committed suicide by destroying its own petrodollar regime, which supports the $40 trillion debt, which will then collapse. So, final word to you, Danny.
Yeah, well, I think given what you just said, I want to address some, I think, counterpoints that I've seen circulating on social media and, other arenas, because I know that there are some who, see this and they say something to the effect of, well, the United States doesn't care about its military bases. That's what they'll say. Oh, they don't care about its military position in the region. These bases are being sacrificed for the larger goal of eventually strangling Iran and, in the long term, moving Iran into a position where it is more compliant. Some even cite the Venezuela model, for example, as a possible future for Iran. And some have even tried to make the argument that the current leadership in Iran is compromised and wants to work with the US in order to make some kind of deal which will sell Iran, out and Iranians out. And none of that has come to be even close to the factual situation we're seeing on the ground. But I think a big point I want to stress is that actually the U.S. military's position in the region is very important. And it is not necessarily being quote unquote sacrificed, it is just being eliminated by Iran. The United States did not come to West Asia, build all of these bases surrounding Iran in order to simply spend money on the military industrial complex. That is certainly one reason for it. But another big reason is because they believe that this military presence can eventually cut down Iran and cut down any kind of alternative that should emerge in other parts of this region, because it is the gateway to Eurasia. It is a gateway to the world from the east by land. It is the land corridor for the Belt and Road Initiative. It is the land corridor in many respects to what Russia, China, Iran, and the rest of the world want to do in this region in terms of building a more um, prosperous multipolar world. So I just want to stress that, in fact, not only are these bases very critical, but they are part of what is not necessarily a strategy, but what you could call a toolbox for the U.S. empire to achieve its actual objectives. Might not have a strategy on how to actually lay this out and do it. No, um, that's far too communistic and planned of an imperialist empire like the United States, but it has a bunch of tools that it likes to usually employ in order to destroy and subordinate other countries and peoples to the petrodollar, to the US controlled financial system, and of course, the political and military affairs and relations that are necessary to do this. So, Iran hasn't just been wiping away U.S. bases and hasn't just been causing the U.S. to retreat in many instances from these bases, but it has also eroded every other tool that the U.S. has tried to employ in this war. We already know that sanctions and financial warfare is extremely limited at this time in terms of grinding Iran down and making it vulnerable to any kind of political shift favorable to the United States. We already see that over decades, but especially now, is having less and less of an effect. Actually, what this war has done is steeled Iranian people, made them even more likely to give up far more than they would have prior to February 28th of this year, in order to defeat the United States and in order to preserve their sovereignty. So actually, sanctions are a far weaker weapon than they were before. But I think there's another element to this too. It's the proxy war. We mentioned Iraq before. These forces, these Kurdish, I don't know if there's anything left there. We already see air defenses. The U.S. is pulling them out of Iraq. I believe that what Iran has done in Iraq, to weaken this potential armed force that the U.S. has been trying to train via U.S. intelligence for many, many years, is likely so weak that it's not really a force at all. Because if anybody's been following this channel, mine and others who follow these developments, then you know that every day we report that Iran has been striking these forces. So Iran has been actually attacking every single part of what is the U.S.'s toolbox to dominate a country like Iran that it's employed in countless other places since 1945. And I believe that's critical to understand if you're going to understand or try to make the argument that the US's military position doesn't matter. Perhaps in the, if you want to try to read the minds of these sickos in Washington, or the Epstein class, all of them, if you want to try to do that and say, okay, well, maybe they wouldn't care so much about US military bases, maybe that's, but they care about the entire toolbox. So if the military bases are becoming useless, if not a complete liability, and the rest of the toolbox is looking less and less effective, if not completely eroded, then what does the US empire have to assert itself in this war to dominate and destroy Iran, and therefore weaken the multipolar world? The answer is not much. So I think you have to understand that this is not just a campaign to by Iran to weaken the U.S. militarily in the region, and it is, and it's unfounded that it could be said the U.S. doesn't care about its military bases. The fact of the matter is the U.S. never had capabilities to protect its military bases. Never thought that Iran could strike in this way. Never believed in a million years that Iran would fire 9,000 missiles and drones since February 28th, and that 9,000 number seems to have absolutely no effect on what it can do in the months, if not years, to come. Um it would never believe this because it didn't have the intelligence it thought it had. It likely didn't even try as hard as many people think the U.S. and Israel tried to collect intelligence. They're trying to find Moshtaba Khamenei right now. They're reporting that they can't do that, and the reason is because uh, they have aggressively used war as a way to essentially weaken their position as legitimate forces that people want to collaborate with around intelligence. So they're losing intelligence capabilities along with all of these other tools in the toolbox, and that, I think, is the real story. The real story is that actually U.S.'s military position might matter more now, and now that it's being eroded because all the other means are exhausted. So I just wanted to stress that because I do see a lot of people seeing this as maybe some kind of game, right? Some kind of this is just some kind of game the U.S. is playing, and eventually they're going to find some people, Ghalibaf, this person, that person, they're compromised. That people try to look at this as some kind of I don't know, James Bond operation. There's a manipulation. There's some kind of everyone's in on it kind of thing. And no, I think what we're seeing is that Iran has a set of interests. Iranian people have interests. The region has interests. Um, and what Iran is doing is it is fighting like hell for its own, and also looking at the regional situation as a big opportunity to move on the United States in a way that will create lasting solutions to this problem of U.S. empire, at least as a step in the right direction. And I think that's what we're going to continue to see Iran doing, and I think it'll leak into regional and global context here. So that's all I wanted to say. I wanted to put that out there because I think it's important to counter what I think a lot of times are um, maybe fact-free suspicions and maybe nihilism, maybe a little bit of fatigue from what is going to be a long war, and what has already been a long war in many ways.
Well, thank you, Danny. Thank you so much. I'm so honored, so privileged to have you here. And for our audience, I hope you enjoyed this as much as I enjoyed it. Danny is a very respected speaker with his own very unique voice that we welcome with both arms on our channel because he adds a perspective, a dimension that we did not have. Our goal is to provide unvarnished information, and Danny definitely does that. And it is our hope that you will see him every week at this time on this channel, adding to and enlarging the context of everything that we bring to you and everything he brings to you. So thank you very much, Danny. Our audience, if you like what we do, please hit the like and subscribe button. Go to the Substack transition protocol, become a paid member. We will deliver this inside your mailbox every week. And we hope to see you again, Danny. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Bye bye. I'm going to hit stop.